I just want to point out what the president, speaking of threats, said the United States is now going to reinstate sanctions, the most severe sanctions against Iran at the highest level. Those are his words. And he also said that any nation that helps Iran with its nuclear program will be sanctioned by the U.S., right, presumably referring to the closest U.S. allies in Europe as well. Barbara Starr's over at the Pentagon getting more information. What are you learning, Barbara?
Well, Wolf, good afternoon. This situation could be broadening at this hour. I've spoken to several U.S. military officials who say there is growing concern that Iran could be preparing for some sort of attack against Israel. This comes amid all of this escalating tension between the U.S., Iran, and Israel. They can't say at this point what kind of attack, what the intelligence is particularly showing them, but we already know that Israeli authorities, according to news reports, are saying that air raid shelters in the Golan Heights in northern Israel should be made available, that they are seeing concerning signs of Iranian movements potentially inside Syria. What U.S. military officials are telling me right now, they are looking at intelligence that has them worried Iran could be aiming to take a swing at Israel. What they don't know is, would it come from Iranian forces already inside Syria? Would it come from Iranian third-party affiliates, if you will, like Hezbollah in Lebanon? Or would it come from inside Iran itself, which would, of course, be a significant military escalation? So all of this coming as the president withdraws from the Iranian nuclear agreement. And of course, they have very good intelligence that what Iran has been doing is shipping weapons into Syria, Israel firing back, bombing some of those weapon sites, and now the escalation amongst all of this may be growing. U.S. military officials at this hour saying they are worried that Iran could be preparing for some sort of strike against Israel. Wolf?
Very disturbing developments. Barbara, stand by. Oren Lieberman is in Jerusalem getting Israeli reaction. New York Times bureau chief Thomas Erdbrand is in Tehran for us. First, Oren, to you, what's the latest you're hearing there from the Israelis?
And we got a statement from the Israeli military, the Israel Defense Forces, saying that bomb shelters have been opened up in the Golan Heights, specifically because, and I'll read this from the statement, they have identification of irregular activity of Iranian forces in Syria. So they've opened up bomb shelters and put the Israeli military on high alert in the Golan Heights. So that exactly echoes what we just heard from Barbara Starr about the assessment that there may be some sort of response, perhaps soon. And it's worth pointing out that it's not just in response to the Americans pulling out of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. It's been Israel's assessment that Iran has been planning some sort of response for some time now because of strikes on Syrian military bases with Iranian forces that Iran has blamed on Israel. It's worth pointing out that Israel has not commented. In terms of the speech itself, and Wolf, you said this, it is exactly what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to hear. In fact, it almost sounded like Netanyahu could have written the speech right after Trump spoke. Netanyahu issued this response, essentially a glowing review of what he'd heard from Trump.
Israel fully supports President Trump's bold decision today to reject the disastrous nuclear deal with the terrorist regime in Tehran. Israel has opposed the nuclear deal from the start because we said that rather than blocking Iran's path to a bomb, the deal actually paves Iran's path to an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs, and this within a few years' time. President Trump did an historic move, and this is why Israel thanks President Trump for his courageous leadership, his commitment to confront the terrorist regime in Tehran, and his commitment to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Not today, not in a decade, not ever.
And those are responses we heard from Israel's defense minister as well as Israel's ambassador to the UN. So from the Israeli government's perspective, that was exactly what they wanted to hear. Trump hitting all of Netanyahu's talking points there in terms of sunset provisions, warning of a nuclear arms race, warning that the deal didn't cover ballistic missiles. Those have been all of Netanyahu's talking points as he's tried to push, and now it's very obvious, tried to push the U.S. to nix the Iran deal, given that there was no real option or no real possibility of fixing the Iran deal. I want to point out something Jim was talking about just a moment ago when he said Trump referenced Netanyahu's presentation just about a week ago, but pointed out there was nothing new there. Netanyahu himself had a briefing with foreign media as well as some senior Israeli officials, trying to keep that story out there and keeping it new. But we asked point blank, what's the most recent document you found? And they said, look, most of what we have is from 2003, some of which is from 2005. So the documents in this new archive are 13 years old and don't really speak to what Iran's planning now. It's a program that the IAEA and others have said was shelved a long time ago. Still, that doesn't change the fact that from Israel's perspective, from Netanyahu's perspective, that's exactly what Trump said is exactly what they wanted to hear. And Wolf, I'll conclude with this point. It's Russia that's the big player in the region. Netanyahu is on his way to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow, and that may play very much into how Israel and Iran, the relations, the tensions there, play out over the next few days.
Yeah, tensions could escalate too next Monday when the U.S. formally, officially opens up its new embassy in Jerusalem, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I want to go to Tehran right now. New York Times Tehran bureau chief Thomas Erdbrink is joining us right now. So what's the reaction so far, Thomas? What are you hearing?
Well, you can imagine that normal, ordinary Iranians are devastated by this news. As Jason Rezaian also pointed out, people don't want to see the movie of sanctions played again. People here had been hoping for jobs. They had been hoping to get better education for their kids. And they had also been hoping that their own leaders would normalize their policies after the nuclear agreement. And you can debate long and hard about what happened, but for many Iranians, it is clear that some of the measures Iran's leaders have taken have not been the right ones, especially in the economy. There's corruption, there's mismanagement. But at the same time, from the start, the United States has violated, in the eyes of the Iranians, parts of the deal. The fact that from Iran you still cannot transfer any money to other countries. The fact that the U.S. administrations have been discouraging European companies from doing business in Iran, companies that were supposed to bring those jobs here. Sorry. Companies that were supposed to invest here, and the companies that were supposed to prop up the agreements made in the nuclear deal, they haven't come to Iran. Those jobs haven't materialized, and they have seen the results of this. The Iranian national currency has dropped by 35% compared to a year ago. Many people feel that there's economically no solution. There have been protests here in January and December, partly also against the system, about the economy, also about lack of freedoms. Now, of course, many Iranians find this painful, and they feel as if they are a victim of these powers of the fight between the U.S. and the Iranian leadership.
Yeah, so it's a serious moment right now. In Iran, they're going to have to very, very carefully assess what the President of the United States has just announced. Thomas, we're going to get back to you shortly, but Jim Sciutto, I know you're anxious to weigh in as well. The fear we heard from Barbara Starr, from Oren Lieberman, that this could result within days. Israel's gearing up right now for potentially some sort of Iranian military action against Israel in the Golan Heights.
Well, there's a reason that Israel is preparing its people for that, and that officials in the Pentagon, speaking to Barbara, are telling that. So they must be seeing some intelligence to that effect.